The Miami Dolphins have a culture problem, and with Jalen Ramsey seeking a trade to get away from the Miami Dolphins, that accentuates that even more. I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about this topic. It's something I've thought about over the weekend, and quite frankly, I've now come to the conclusion after doing research and formulating my thoughts that Miami does indeed have a culture issue. And like I said, Jalen Ramsey is, one of the big examples that exemplify that idea. So Miami has this culture problem. Jumping right into it, what is the culture issue in Miami? Well, to start, the big issue with Miami is their on-field success. The Miami Dolphins have been a very middling team, a team that's been in the playoff hunt in the Mike McDaniel era, but they really have not felt like that true bona fide playoff team. In 2022, they looked really good. They just missed the playoffs. They went 9-8, and people thought Miami had a bright future. They had Tyreek Hill. That was his first year there. He had 1,900 yards, went insane, right? And 2024 rolled around, and then they started off really hot. They had that 70-point game against Denver in 2024, right? Or no, 2023, excuse me. And they ended up going to the playoffs that year, and they lost in the wild card round in Kansas City, which, okay, whatever. And then this year, Tua got hurt. They started off really slow. Tua came back. The offense was not the same, even with him back in there, even though it improved. And then next thing I know, they go 8-9 and then miss the playoffs. And the one common theme with their record and being middling is that they cannot play a complete season. 2022 and 2023, these teams absolutely fell apart in December, right? And against Kansas City in January, they got their crap rocked really bad. And then this year, there was just past year in 2024, the Dolphins started off slow with Tua's injury, and they got better as the year went on. They were winning more games. But I distinctly remember saying that throughout those final weeks of the season, even though Miami was in the playoff hunt, they were actually mathematically in the playoff hunt all the way till week 18. But the entire time, I was saying Miami's not a playoff team. They're not making the playoffs. Despite the fact that they kept on winning, I was saying they're not a playoff team. They're simply not. And whoop-de-doo, they did not make the playoffs. And with that being said, in the McDaniel era, they're 7-12 in games in December and January, including that one playoff game. And their offense has struggled to find success when Tua, is not healthy. And of course, no team is going to, perform as normal without their starting quarterback as if he's in there. But the drop-off that the Miami Dolphins had when Tua was out was very alarming. It was extremely alarming to a point where the team went from, if Tua started all 17 games, sure, they're a fringe playoff team. But if Tua had went down and was done for the whole year, this team would have won only 5 or 6 games at max. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. And that stems from the fact that the players that they have simply have not been good enough for what they've been paying them. 2 out of the top 3 players on the field for Miami, right? Jalen Ramsey, who has just requested a trade, and then Tyreek Hill. Those guys not only... Well, Tyreek Hill has been probably more than advertised since coming to Miami overall throughout his entire tenure there. But he's had issues off the field, right? Some stuff right before the season started, before the season opener, right? A bunch of domestic issues with his significant other and their kid, right? That's a whole another thing. But more importantly, on the football side of things, after the season was over, he talked about how he wanted to be out of the team, wanted to do what's best for his family, right? Said all that stuff, and then the GM of the Dolphins had to come out and say, oh, we're not trading Tyreek Hill. He's not on the market, right? And kind of, calm those rumors down. So a lot of off-field drama directly relating to the team. And then all of a sudden, Jalen Ramsey out of nowhere has requested a trade and has given permission to seek a trade. And it seems like the Dolphins are more than willing to find a partner to ship him away. So that's an issue. And then when you have your top highest paid player in Tua Tagovailoa, an injury-prone quarterback, who, when he's hurt, the team completely falls apart, that is a very unstable foundation for your top 3 players to be paid. That's not ideal whatsoever. But that continues. 2 out of the top 5 highest paid players are Miami Dolphins, on the Miami Dolphins, are players that they didn't draft. Those 2 top 5 players are Tyreek Hill and Jalen Phillips. Or not Tyreek Hill, Tua Tagovailoa, and then Jalen Phillips, number 1 and number 4. Their top 5 are Tua, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Ramsey, Jalen Phillips, and Zach Seiler. And then 3 out of the top 10 are paid by Miami. The third one being Jalen Waddle. That's it. That's it. And that leads to the second issue with Miami and their culture problem is that they don't have a culture. They don't have a culture or an identity because they don't have players in Miami that have been there a long time. Part of what makes a locker room culture that's tight, right? When you think about winning football teams, you have a bunch of players that have been there for a long time. You have players with experience, not just playing experience. You got players that have been in the organization, that have been in the building for a long time. Players that maybe on a rebuilding team were part of those bad years. And then now they're part of the good years and they're a leader, even better leader because of it, because they went through the bad times to get to the good times, for example, right? I'm just throwing an example. But part of building a culture definitely is having players that have experience that have been on your team for a very long time. And for Miami, that's just not the case. Almost all of their top players that they've had and drafted over the years have left in free agency. Guys, for example, like, Robert Hunt, Christian Wilkins, Andrew Van Ginkel, going into last offseason. Guys like Javon Holland this season, for example, they cut Kendall Fuller. Well, Kendall Fuller, no, I take that back. He was not drafted by the Miami Dolphins. I think they picked him up from Washington a couple years back. That's not the point. Anyways, players like that, they've had a lot of players that they drafted, contribute for their franchise, but they don't reward them. They don't pay them, but they pay a bunch of players on the outside. And so you have a locker room that doesn't understand the Miami Dolphins. That doesn't understand what it means to be a Dolphin. Because the players that have been there a long time, there's not any of them. I think the longest tenured Miami Dolphin of note, at least in my mind, off the top of my head, is Tua Tagovailoa. And what is that? 2021, 2, 3, 4, 5? He's going to his 6th year. He's going to his 6th. Having a quarterback going to his 6th year, that's great. That's good. And you haven't got a franchise quarterback, but where's the franchise wide receiver? Jalen Waddle, he's going into year 5, which is fine. But offensive linemen, nothing. Of course, they have a few offensive linemen there that are the Miami Dolphins drafted, right? But none of them are great. The offensive line is really not that good in Miami. Then you have on the defensive side, who do they have there that they've drafted? Jalen Phillips, that's it. Chop Robinson, he's a first-round pick and looks promising, but that was 1 year, right? Going into year 1, Jalen Phillips is going into year 4, I think. Right? Yeah, going to year 4. And then after that, who else? All the star corners, right? All the people in the secondary are gone. Javon Holland's gone. Rashad Jones is gone. Xavier Howard's been cut, right? All those guys are gone. They have no bona fide experience outside of a couple players that have been with the Miami Dolphins for a long time. And that hurts your culture building. And when you are paying players on the outside and not paying the players that you draft, it destroys that culture. It destroys the culture, it destroys your locker room, it destroys the continuity that you have there. The thing is, you build your roster through the draft. I think teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, teams like the Baltimore Ravens, the Philadelphia Eagles, those are 3 teams that are staples, that are the standard for how you want to build your team, which is building through the draft. That is how these teams have remained successful for so many years now. That being said, Miami has done the exact opposite. They've drafted players, let them walk, and then they pay top dollar for other players to fill in those spots. And that's not how that works. That is not how that works. You don't use the draft to have placeholders in certain positions. No, you draft these players and you pay them because them being in the building is worth more than just what they do on the field. And that's the point of why you give a player a second contract. It's not just because of what they bring you on the field, but it's what they bring off the field as well. And guys like Christian Wilkins, Andrew Van Ginkel, right? They go to their other teams and they're talked about and raved about their leadership. And it's like, why did you not want to keep those guys in the building? Why not? And then you got the players that they've paid. They simply have not been good enough. You look at the offensive line. They paid Teron Armstead. He's been good, but he lasted only a couple years and he's retired, right? And then other guys they brought in through free agency, like, for example, Aaron Brewer to play center, garbage, straight garbage. I'm a Titans fan. I know very much and well that Aaron Brewer was very much garbage and should not be a starting NFL offensive lineman, but that's not the point. Then you look at the edge rushers. Their starting edge rushers right now are Chop Robinson and Jalen Phillips. And, well, Nick Chubb, they paid him top dollar. He was a bust. He's out. Jalen Phillips, well, he's okay. He's constantly injured. He's injury prone. He's not constantly available. Chop Robinson, first round pick, unproven right now. And then you look at Phillips, Chop Robinson, and Emmanuel Ogbah. Those three players combined for 12 sacks. Andrew Van Ginkel, who's coming off his best year of his career year in Minnesota, had 11 and a half by himself. That's a problem. That is a huge problem that it took three players to barely surpass one player's production by half a sack. I'm not saying that Andrew Van Ginkel is some superstar pass rusher or anything. He never eclipsed 6 sacks in a season before 2024. So I'm not going to be saying like, oh, they let a really good player walk away. But also, for example, Christian Wilkins. Christian Wilkins is a really good football player. And while Zach Seiler, he's good in his own right. He's coming off of a 10-sack season. I would still say Christian Wilkins is a better football player than Zach Seiler. I know he was better this year because Christian Wilkins got hurt, right, early in the year. But when Christian Wilkins was on the field for the Raiders, he wasn't bad. He was not bad at all. And I still, like I said, I still think Christian Wilkins is a better player than Zach Seiler. So you're not really, the players that you're paying are not replacing the production that you're losing, and you're spending more money for it, and you're getting worse product because of it. It's just not a sustainable foundation. It's not how you build your roster. You build your roster through the draft, and if the players play well for you, you pay them and keep them around. You do that. The Miami Dolphins don't do that. I don't know why they don't, but you know what? They do that, and look at where they are. They're a middling football team. Why? Because they pay players that are not too much money. You're not getting the value out of them, and the players that they do draft, whether they hit or not, they leave. So there's no continuity in the locker room of players that have been with the organization for a long time. And you look at, for example, the Kansas City Chiefs, who's been there for a long time. Andy Reid, not a player, but he is a coach. That does matter, right? But you think about a player like Kareem Hunt. You know, he was not with the Chiefs for a while, but came back to the Chiefs. But he was drafted by the Chiefs, and he's been around the league for a long time. So he has a better understanding of what it means to be a Chief than some players, right? You think about a player like Jawan Taylor. Jawan Taylor's been there for a little bit. I don't think he was drafted by the Chiefs, though. I'm trying to think. Long-tenured Chiefs. You know what's crazy is not a lot come to mind. Not a lot of veterans that have been on the team for a long time. Wow, the Chiefs have actually gone through a lot more roster moves than I thought they did. Wow. Okay, well, let's go to the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson, he was drafted in 2018. Michael Pierce, he retired, but he's been in the league for a very long time. Think about Roquan Smith. He's been in the league for 6, 7, 8 years now, right? Think about Marlon Humphrey. Marlon Humphrey was drafted in 2019. He's been in the league for a long time. The Ravens got a bunch of players. Kyle Van Noy wasn't drafted by him, but they have players that the Miami Dolphins have drafted that have been there for a long time, but also they have a bunch of players that they've drafted, over the past few years that have been there the entire time, contributed well, and have a chance of making it to their second contracts, right? And then, for example, Philly, look at Brandon Graham, for crying out loud, right? Jalen Hurts has been there 5 years, for example. I'm trying to think of some other ones. Lane Johnson, right? Jason Kelsey before he retired. You think Jordan Mailata has been there since like 2020, so that's 6 years. You think of, let me see, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, they're going to year 3 and year 4. That's too young. Think about Darius Slay, for example, right? Well, Darius Slay wasn't drafted by the Eagles, but my point still kind of stands with some of these examples that, you have players that you pay that you keep around for a long time. As a Titans fan, GM Mike Borgonzi talked about this in his press conference, in his opening press conference, when he talked about Harold Landry and Jeffrey Simmons, where those players are guys you want to keep around for a long time because what they do off the field and for the locker room is more important than what they just do on the field. And then they ended up cutting Harold Landry, which I can understand, but that's a different point. So now, with all that laid out, with the Miami Dolphins not paying their players properly, and they're overpaying for players that are not matching up their value from what they got paid, right? You got issues with the top players on your team, whether it's injury issues, off the field issues, or just disgruntlement with the franchise, openly, mind you. And now you have the top thing is ownership. Stephen Ross is not a very good owner. You know, some of the stuff he's been in controversies in over the past couple of years, in 2019 when the Dolphins were losing a bunch of games, the whole tank for Tua season, when that was going on, in the Brian Flores lawsuit that he made against Stephen Ross and the Miami Dolphins, court-mandated evidence came out stating that Stephen Ross tried to pay Brian Flores to intentionally lose games. So that's a thing. And then a couple of years ago, he had a controversy where he was illegally tampering with Tom Brady and Sean Payton to come be in Miami, and they ended up losing a first-round pick because of it. So Stephen Ross is not an innocent party by any means, and he is the root issue with the Miami Dolphins in terms of all this stuff. He's not paying players. He's overpaying for players that are on the outside, bringing in, and all what it's led to is a team that has no identity. Their culture is in question, is out of whack because there's no players with a lot of experience there outside of a couple, and even then 6 and 5 years is great, but those should not be the two highly experienced Miami Dolphins players on your team. And then now you have an owner that is just cheap and has controversies on his back. So now you have a middling team that's never feels like a playoff team despite being in that mix the entire time. And to conclude all of it, I don't know if the Miami Dolphins are going to be good in 2025. A lot of people are thinking they're going to take a step back, and now I'm one of those people that believe it. And they're at a point where they are stuck. They are straight up stuck. They need to nail this draft coming up here in a couple days. And maybe, they get a couple players that are pretty good. And then maybe Stephen Ross decides to pay them. And then, bam, you're good. Like, there's still a chance to fix this and get it right. But with how they've paid players and how much money they've given out, they are stuck. They are literally stuck where they are losing players. They can't afford to pay players either, which is a point I haven't mentioned with the contracts that they've shelled out. And so now you got a bunch of players that are underperforming. They're disgruntled, not happy, and there's no culture. There's no culture identity because no one's been there a long time. No one truly knows what it means to be a Miami Dolphin. So that is my take on the Miami Dolphins having a culture issue, kind of a ramble discussion there, especially in the second half. But I think I got all my points laid out and clearly. But that will do it for me today, guys. Hope you guys have enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. It would help me out a lot and helps the channel out tremendously as we continue to grow and spread our football passions together to more and more people on the platform. Want to hit 100 subscribers before the season starts. Also, Dolphins fans, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you agree that Miami's got a culture problem? Do you not agree? I want to hear all of your nice thoughts. And then also share the video on social media, whether it's by word of mouth or, by the word of mouth or on social media, right? Getting everybody locked in and locked on to the Shoe Make Take. Again, coming out with great content for you guys every single week. Got a mock draft coming out very, very soon. My final one. I did one over the weekend and I decided I'm going to redo it. Trying to mock a trade. I don't know. Maybe not. I might just use the mock draft I have now that doesn't have any trades. I just can't mock it. That's beyond me to me. But other than that, lastly, make sure to follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter/X, whichever one you want to use. Make sure to follow me there as well. But as always, hope you guys have enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.